In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Angela Davies. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. Today, we are going to be talking a lot about habits, and I am thrilled to have my guest, Dr. Bree Hurn, on the show to have a chat with her today. Dr. Bree is a Melbourne-based academic, coach, keynote speaker, and mother of two girls. So she's got a lot on her plate. She's got a lot to share about habits. She's known affectionately as the Habit Nerd, and Bree holds a Doctor of Education, bringing over 25 years of experience in the field. After battling chronic fatigue in her late 20s, a challenge that taught her the power and fragility of personal energy, she became passionate about helping driven, multi-passionate individuals reclaim their sense of control and purpose. Bree leads transformational group programs designed to show ambitious working people how to work less and achieve more by aligning habits with values, energy, and identity. She's also the host of the Habit Nerd podcast, which, incidentally, her and I launched our podcast on the same day. Welcome to the show, Bree.
Thank you, Ange. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. And I actually can't believe it's a full circle serendipitous moment for us having launched on the same day and then to be guesting on each other's podcasts. So yeah, a real privilege, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. And that's what I love about the podcasting world, isn't it? I think there's so much serendipity there and so much knowledge that we can all gain from each other and share with our audiences. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into learning from you today. I want to start with, I guess, what started you or was a pivotal point in your journey, and that's your chronic fatigue. And I'd love to know how it reshaped your approach and understanding a little bit more about your experience, and then sharing the biggest mindset shift that you recommend for people who might be overcoming or recovering from something like chronic fatigue or burnout or overextending themselves.
It's a bit of a traumatic memory, as you can probably appreciate, suffering something like chronic fatigue syndrome. I was in my late 20s, so, well over 20 years ago now, and I'm really pleased to say that I'm fully well, but it has left an indelible mark on the way, I live and work and operate in the world. So the reason I do like to bring the story out into the light is because it's a reminder that to look at people and the way they work or the way they live, it's really easy to say things like, I don't know how she does all of that. How does she manage all of that? She must have boundless energy. She must have, and that for me couldn't be further from the truth. And so I was in my late 20s. I got an illness like a virus like anybody else would get, parvovirus or slap cheek as it's known. And because I was at a particularly low ebb doing work that I wasn't managing particularly well, I was probably operating beyond my skill set at the time. I didn't have a whole lot of support. The place I was working and the leaders I was working under weren't particularly good mentors, and there was a bit of toxic relationship amongst the leaders that was, I suppose, filtering down into the middle leadership space that I was working in. So I was burnt out would be probably the simplest way to say it, because, it was a kind of garden variety run of the mill virus that anybody could get. But because I was particularly vulnerable in a mental health capacity at the time, I think it struck me with more significance. So even though I got over the acute symptoms of the virus, I was left with, after 6 months, still not much better in terms of the fatigue. So I had what's known as fibromyalgia, which is inflammation of the joints. Even though it's called chronic fatigue syndrome, I had trouble sleeping. So I actually had insomnia and, just bone crushing fatigue really, and mental fog, etc. So the same thing now, they won't diagnose chronic fatigue until it is chronic, and so it has to be a minimum of 6 months with those symptoms. So I was banished to the couch. I couldn't wash my own hair. The world became very small, and I just had to learn to manage it because, at the time, and still now, unfortunately, there's really kind of no medical remedy or fix for it. And so it's more lifestyle change, even though we know a lot more about it now. And thankfully, medical practitioners acknowledge it as a real thing, which wasn't necessarily the case with some of my treating doctors back then. It relied on me to make some really significant changes. So those changes were things like what we would now recognize as Dr. Huberman's work on non-sleep deep rest. So basically things like, yoga nidra, really deep meditation, really intentional rest. I found a doctor over in the UK who practiced neuro-linguistic programming. And so, I suppose that was thrown in the mix around getting over that stuckness and being able to use language as part of meditation to move through the stuckness. And then there were the lifestyle things, really intentional use of hydration, anti-inflammatory foods, those sorts of things. So, and just intense rest. So I was very lucky to get well. But as I say, it's something that kind of hangs around like a bit of a shadow, and I can be a little bit susceptible to mild symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome if I go overboard. So I suppose what it has left me with, and this is the mindset that, to circle back to the first part of your question, is that energy is really, really precious. That it's not renewable in the way that money might be renewable. Once you've spent too much of it, you really can get yourself into trouble. And also energy is personal. So what burns me out or what exhausts me would be very different to my neighbor or my friend or maybe you, Ange. So I suppose I've learned how precious energy is, how you need to manage energy, and just how energy is not just physical energy. There are all different types, which, I'm really happy to dive into as well.
First of all, thank you for sharing your story, Bree, because I know sometimes it can bring up things when you share back and think of that time. And I'm so sorry that you were met with at the time not the best acknowledgement by medical professionals about what's going on. And I really do think only recently, relatively, has chronic fatigue syndrome really been acknowledged by the medical profession. And the fact that someone would have to wait 6 months to experience the symptoms for that long before anything's even looked at feels heartbreaking. I got goosebumps listening to your story. So thank you for sharing that. You spoke a lot about energy management, and I agree with you. I think energy is so important, attentional energy as much as physical energy. And quite often we think that the people who are doing it all have the boundless energy, like you said, but that's just not always the case. So I'd love to know, we spoke about energy being a really precious resource. I think time and energy are probably two of the most precious resources. But what advice do you have for listeners tuning in to their own energy levels to make sure that they're understanding if they're depleted or if they're just feeling tired? I think we sort of normalize just pushing through. So how do you encourage people to check in with their energy?
Yeah, these are really great questions. And I should probably say one of the reasons that things like chronic fatigue syndrome are gaining a little bit more credibility now is since COVID and long COVID. So, I think the medical world are paying a little bit more attention now to post-viral illnesses, whatever that means. And, the people who have been really unfortunate to contract long COVID symptoms, they really are mirroring this sort of chronic, ongoing symptoms with sort of no hope, like no immediate, medical cure as such. So the reason I mention that is because I think it's helpful here to talk about what's called the energy envelope. Now, I don't know if this is familiar to you, Ange, or to your audience, and I'm really happy to share the link for your show notes so that people can have a look at this. Is based on the work of B.E. Ainsworth. Now, it only came out last year in response to things like long COVID. Basically, he's a medical researcher and he worked with hundreds of patient advocates to come up with this framework which helps people get really curious about their own energy. Now, what it is that it is broken into different categories. So there's physical energy, there's cognitive energy, which is our thinking energy, and then there's social and emotional energy. Now, what the energy envelope is, it's kind of like a bank account. And think of a bank account as you've got a certain amount of deposits that you can make each day without going into overdraft. So if you spend too much of your energy and it puts you into overdraft, the overdraft is physical symptoms in this scenario. So the idea is it's your safe spending limit for each day. And if you think about when you get home after a day at work, there's tired, as you say, but then the tiredness is things that remedies with rest. Yeah. So you might lie on the couch, or you might read a book, or you might have a really good sleep, and the next day you wake up and you're doing okay. That day at work could have consisted of only cognitive activities, as in you could have been working from home, or you could have been working from an office which is fairly easy to get to, so there wasn't a whole lot of physical demand on you getting there or home, but yet you are absolutely exhausted. And the
Yeah.
reason you are exhausted is because maybe the cognitive drain was a little bit more than your envelope or your bank account for that day could cope with for you as an individual. Now, the reason the energy envelope is helpful is because we can give different things a score, and research would show us things like multitasking, for example, or reading a really difficult research report would be about a 9 or a 10 out of 10 on the energy envelope. Whereas something else that's fairly mundane and fairly easy for you cognitively would be right down, at a 2 or a 3. So if you were to think about context switching as an example for, perhaps a day at work for you, you've got 15 things to do and you're constantly jumping between different contexts, different types of work, that's, even though the things that you're doing in those 15 things are not cognitively demanding for you, the fact that you're switching so often is exhausting your cognitive stores. So that is multitasking, or context switching, for example, might be on par and a 10 out of 10 as physical, going for a run or going on the rowing machine or lifting, doing some kind of high intensity exercise. And a 10 out of 10 in social and emotional energy, and this, people find real resonance with this, is things like socializing with 6 or more people. Because
I love you say that. Sorry to interrupt, because you know what I say to my friends, because I'm an introvert by nature, Bree. I say, I don't like catching up with any more than 6 people. 6 people's my number, and I don't even know where I came up with that.
Yeah, well, research would support it, Ange. And so that's a really good example of you getting curious about what's significant for you in terms of your energy, because I'm very much the same, and it's research informed, in fact, because I know my sister, she actually gains energy from huge parties. So 50, 60 people, she's in her element. For me, my limit is like a dinner with 4 people, and that's sort of my choice of where my energy is at its kind of sweet spot. So it's a really good reflection if you think about, we pay lip service to this idea of energy being just our physicality, how much energy it takes to do the housework compared to walk the dog compared to go for a run, for example. But if we get a little bit more curious with where the research matches our kind of personal dispositions and the way we are and our personality and all of those things which need to be laid on top of that, that would be my advice around your energy envelope. And so, as I said, I can share this link. There are things that research would show are a 10 out of 10, and there are things that research would show are much lower. But if you really tune into your body and get a little bit intuitive and understand that you are really unique in the way that your energy expenditure is benefiting or not benefiting you, then you can make some decisions throughout your day. So another example which listeners might recognize is using our phone. You can watch something on your phone. So you could watch, an episode of your favorite show, or you could spend an hour on Instagram. And social media is like a 6 out of 10, whereas watching something using your phone is a 2 out of 10. So even that is not apples with apples, because, if you tune into your energy after you've spent some time scrolling on Instagram or Facebook or Threads or Twitter or whatever it is that you're using, you might recognize that you have a feeling that you've got less energy in your envelope, in your purse to then go and spend on something else. And it's because of the cognitive and the social emotional stuff that's done whilst you're engaging in that. So all of this is to say that if you make decisions based on what is best for your personal energy throughout a day, and then almost map that into the different responsibilities that you have, that's kind of the optimum use of your energy. So there's a lot of research, and you'd recognize this in kind of the productivity world, that maybe we're lucky enough in a work sense to get 3 hours of deep work a day.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about reading a really complex research report or having to decipher some complex numbers, for example, at work, that is going to take quite a significant amount of your cognitive energy. That is best done after you've had a good sleep, after you've engaged in some movement that is energy giving, after you've had enough water and that your brain and your body feels well hydrated. It would be silly to be reading that research report or have a spreadsheet open and do some calculations of complex numbers and be jumping in and out of your email at the same time, or having your phone there with Slack open or, a work messenger service open, because not only is that asking that number 10 out of 10 is already demanded of you, then you're throwing in some context switching, and then you're suffering from that switch cost effect. And no wonder on days like that, we go home absolutely depleted. And there's a big difference between being tired and needing a rest and, cuddling up on the couch with a cup of tea because you're tired, and being absolutely depleted, because there's only so long of that depletion that we can sustain before we hit burnout or before it starts affecting, our health or our relationships and that sort of thing. So I suppose the question you asked is, what do we need to know about energy, and how can somebody map our energy so that we can be, the most aligned and the most productive with time? I would first of all think about energy in different buckets. So physical, social and emotional and cognitive. Think about what it is that is taking your energy, and are you spending it in the right ways, mapping onto the right times of your day? Because the last thing it's worth saying is, a 10 out of 10 from social emotional energy is conflict. So having a difficult conversation with someone is as exhausting, according to this research, as running on a treadmill for 15 minutes, for example, at full pace.
Wow.
So it does ask as much of us to put that level of thought and empathy and, really reflect on the impact our language and our body language and everything is having on the other person, as well as what it's having on us in a conflict situation, which often happens at work, as compared to a hard gardening session at home, for example.
I love that you say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I love the bank account analogy as an ex-banker. I love the withdrawals and the overdrawn bank account. But I also, it's so interesting to me because I reflect on this. So my husband used to be in the Special Forces. He was a clearance diver in the Navy, and I was in banking in very stressful roles at the time. And I'd come home and he could not understand how I would feel completely depleted because he's out there diving, jumping out of planes, fast roping off buildings or whatever he's doing, which is, of course, physically taxing.
That's right.
But what I was doing was cognitively taxing. And
That's
so,
right.
he now works in more of a corporate job, and he's like, oh, now I get it. He's like, I'd run around and do that all day, every day, overdoing something that's cognitively taxing now.
Yeah, and that would be his choice to do that. And I think, we can't always choose the type of work that we want to do. And there are aspects of all of our jobs that, demand more of us than we'd like to spend in terms of that energy envelope, obviously. But I think it's about being mindful. I was talking to you just before we got on air that you've done some travel this week down to Melbourne. And for me, when I travel interstate, that is very cognitively and physically taxing on me. The transfers at the airport, the, different relationships when I get there, the different weather systems, the accommodation, all of that, which is both cognitively demanding and physically demanding. So if I am fortunate enough, I will create some white space in my calendar for when I get home, because I know that as full as my cup is, because I've loved the work that I've done interstate, I will need some really intentional rest so that the day after that white space day, I'm back to my best. This is what it is. It's about understanding that when we don't have a whole lot of choice around what is demanded of us, because we're busy people in the world and we have jobs and caring responsibilities and all sorts of things, it's about where can we map that energy and use our time in the way that suits our body best, but also where are the pockets for intentional rest so that we can recharge and rejuvenate and understand that we will be able to then show up the next day after that rest.
And it's about being curious, isn't it, Bree? Because it's going to be different for all of us. Some people will have different
Absolutely.
capacity levels for physical, social. You know, I was sharing obviously a moment ago, 6 people's my limit really when it comes to socializing. And I get very exhausted by being around a lot of people. As you shared, your sister thrives off being around a lot of people.
That's
so
right.
it's really
Yeah,
about
that gives her energy.
Yes, self-awareness and getting curious with ourselves around what is depleting us, what's giving us energy, and then how do we create that white space around it. So I love that. And I think, you know, we need to be intentional around that too, on how we create that white space, because I believe resilience is not actually being able to face hard things. It's how quickly we can bounce back
That's right.
from
Hop
either
back up.
expending a lot of energy or dealing with
Yes.
hard stuff.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So then a resilient person, a strategy is where they need to create that boundary for themselves and that distance and that margin.
For
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. I love that, bro. You're a habit expert, the habit nerd, as you call yourself. Can you walk through any habit frameworks that help us maintain our habits, even if we're overwhelmed or stressed or we've got a lot of energy expenditure?
Sure. So I call myself a habit nerd, not necessarily because I'm an expert, but because I'm fascinated by this stuff. And as a researcher, so as somebody who researches for a living, I am really lit up by what the research tells us, yes, but then where that's contextualized into our own lives. So as researchers, we have what's called a worldview or a paradigm, and I'm what's called a pragmatic researcher. So my lens or my paradigm is pragmatism, which all that means is I'm really lit up by the word what could work. Like, yes, this is what the research says, but what works in the world? What works for people? And so I would like to think that my secret sauce here is I read all the research, I indulge in all the books, I've got full bookshelves, I'm, probably a little bit like you, and really kind of curious and lit up by what the latest science is saying, but then that doesn't go anywhere if we don't map it onto our personal magic in the way that we are in the world. So the reason I've started with saying that is that there are many frameworks around habit formation in the world. Some of them are more recognizable than others. James Clear, his 4-part framework is quite a well-known one. BJ Fogg is another one. Wendy Wood's work on good habits, bad habits. I could go on and on and on. It's important to say that you may have heard how long it takes to embed a new habit. Some people say 7 days, some people say 21 days, some people say 33 days. It's important to know it depends. So I suppose all of this is to say that my message around habit is more to think about your own value system. A habit is just simply something that is a settled tendency, and it helps us identify as the person that we want to be in the world. So something that's settled for you would be to clean your teeth in the morning. You don't need to think about doing that. It's a settled tendency. It's part of what you do because you value oral hygiene, you value clean teeth, you value the way it looks, the way that feels in your mouth, your breath, etc. So these aren't things that we need to think about, but a habit is something that you might want to into your life because it feels like something that would make you feel more like yourself. So I think it's more helpful to look at Amantha Imber's research that says there are 4 key areas that would get in the way of a habit becoming embedded. And then once you know which one it is for you, then you can take the action steps. So I'll give you an example, which is certainly true for me, and I would imagine would be resonate with lots of people as well. And this is our idea of our mobile phone use. So, you might get that report on a Sunday, or you could look at it if you wanted about your screen time for the week. And often it's a bit of a shame spiral, isn't it, when we see how many hours we've spent on our phone. Now, if you want to use your mobile phone less, and I certainly want to use my mobile phone less, I would understand, first of all, the reason I want to do that is because of all the reasons I just said. Social media use is not great for us. And, if it's a 5 or a 6 out of 10 in terms of my energy use, and I feel like I could be using that energy in more productive ways for me as a person, not a great example for my kids, and it doesn't make me feel good as a person. So therefore, it's important enough for me in my value system to want to get rid of that habit. So now there are 4 things that would be standing in my way of getting rid of the habit. So the first one would be motivational. So anytime you want to create a new habit or stop a habit that's not serving you, motivation could be what's serving or is problematic. So for example, if I was quite happy with my mobile phone use, but there was a colleague at work who said, Bree, you're on your phone too much. That wouldn't be my motivation. That would be their motivation. So I am quite motivated for all the reasons I've spoken about to stop using my mobile phone. If you need to lose weight because a doctor has told you to lose weight, you will be less motivated by that than if you want to do it yourself. Or your partner said, you've put on a few kilos there. That's not motivating. It's only when it comes from you. So therefore, if you are someone who motivation is lacking, you might need to think about how to make that more intrinsic to want to be able to create that habit. Another one is relational. So we are social beings, and if I want to get off my phone, it's going to be harder to do that if I'm on the couch at night and my husband's on his phone.
Yeah.
So it's about often in the same way, if you want to embed an exercise habit, it's great to be able to do it alongside other people because there's a social proximity there and they've got the behavior that you desire. If it's the people that you're hanging out with that are causing the problem, then you need to be able to make that decision. Say to your husband, can you put your phone away? I'm really trying hard here. Can we both put our phones in the drawer, or can we put them in a lockbox overnight, or whatever it is? So maybe the barrier for you is relational. Another
It's so
one
interesting. Sorry to interrupt you. It's
No,
so
you go,
interesting you
Ange.
say that, though, because they do say, like, we really are the sum of the 5 people around us. And that's with everything, right? What we eat, how we move, the habits that we have. So I think it's so interesting that you say one of the barriers is relational, because you do think about, if you're wanting to eat better or exercise, having someone there with you who's wanting to go along the journey makes it a lot easier to stick to it, but it can also be the thing that can derail you as well. So
That's
I think
right.
that will make a lot of sense for people.
Yeah, and so the reason I give these 4 is because one will have more resonance than the other 3. So you've obviously connected to the relational one, and that's great. Another one is environmental. So this is basically if your mobile phone is right near your hand, you will pick it up. If it is far away and it's in another room or it's in a closed drawer, you won't. If you are trying to eat less sweets after dinner, so chocolate's not serving you before bed, you would put it at the top of the cupboard behind something else, or you wouldn't buy it at all. So the idea that making things hard to reach or making them environmentally easy, if you want to have your water bottle close to you, if you want to drink more water, that's sensible use of your environment, as opposed to not having water nearby and having to walk to the work kitchen and fill up a glass. So, sometimes environment can really help us, and sometimes our environmental cues can get in our way. So that's another one. And the last one is cognitive. And this is basically where I might be on my mobile phone simply because I'm really tired and it's too overwhelming to not be on my phone. Like it's been a really long day and I am lying on the couch, my phone is near me, environmentally it's too easy to get to, and I just am overwhelmed and my energy is depleted, so I might pick it up. So the other thing about cognitive is sometimes there's too many steps to a habit. Like sometimes you want to say something like, I want to get fit, but there's too many steps in between where I am now and this really lofty goal of getting fit. So therefore there's a cognitive barrier there. You're much better to say, I'd like to walk 2 days a week for 15 minutes.
Get
So
really specific.
that's right, because it's not overwhelming on your brain. And when it's overwhelming, you won't do it. So just to recap, it's for me, the first step in embedding any new habit or any framework that you're interested in doing is to think about why it's important to you in the first place, because habits are inextricably linked with our identity. Then it's about thinking, is there a motivational issue here? And if there isn't, can I use motivation in my favor? Is it relational? Is it about the people around me? Or do I need to get in the room or alongside other people who have the behavior that I would like to emulate? Are there some environmental helpers or are there some environmental hijackers? And cognitively, what can I do to take away that sense of the too hard basket for the new habit?
I really appreciate that approach, Bree, because I think so often when we think about habits, we're thinking about ways to get them to stick, not thinking about the barriers to getting them to stick. So I think it's a really nice reframe around, okay, what are the things that are actually barriers to us getting these habits to stick, and how do I address that barrier? Because I do think it's so true. When there are certain things we want to create a habit around, it really is those barriers that stop us, because we have all the right intention, but sometimes we just still don't do it. So that's a really great reframe when it comes to that. How would you recommend if someone loses momentum, say they've had a great habit, say it's movement, right? Say they're moving regularly and then they lose momentum. What's your go-to strategy to try and help reset that habit that you've had previously, but without feeling guilty around it?
Yeah, it's a really important question, because as busy people in the world, the last thing we want is something else on our to-do list. And the other thing is we don't want to shame ourselves into going back to that motivation. Shame is not a good motivation. So if you've wanted an exercise habit and you've stopped, the worst thing is to go, you're the worst, Brie. You always say you're going to do things and then you don't do them. So I would think for the most helpful hack that I would be able to give is this idea of minimal viable action, MVA. We know that action promotes momentum. You need to do the smallest possible thing that you can and then build up tiny pieces of evidence that you are the sort of person who does what they said they were going to do. So an example would be around movement. If you have it's cold and you've been walking in the morning and then all of a sudden it just gets too hard and it's really tricky to turn the alarm off in the get up to the alarm and get out in the cold. That is really fair enough. But at the same time, if you were walking an hour, just tell yourself that you're going to put your runners on and walk to the letterbox. And it's amazing how we can trick ourselves into, once you get to the letterbox, you're going to keep going. So just break it down into the tiniest, most viable action that you could possibly do. And then once your brain has got the evidence that you did that, that's a bit of a quick win. And then you might be more likely to keep going. It might be that you are struggling in the winter to get up at 5:30, maybe you could get up at 6:30 and just do 10 minutes and do a couple of days of that. And then once your brain has got that evidence and you've got a couple of ticks on the board that you are proving to yourself that this is important enough for you to do that. And the other thing is maybe go back to, if you have stopped a habit, which of those 4 things is in your way? Is it that you don't have a coat that's warm enough? And so would that be, the thing that maybe might help? Could it be that you need to leave your runners out with your socks in them and your workout gear next to the bed, so that there's the releasing that environmental barrier of I don't know where my things are and it's just a bit too hard basket. So is it choosing a friend to meet you? So there are always things you can do if you've fallen off the wagon, so to speak. But I would just say start really small, be kind to yourself, and just do the smallest viable action.
Minimum viable action. I love that, because I think, I say this a lot. People often say, how do you get motivated? I don't have the motivation to start. And I always say, do the thing and then the motivation comes.
Right.
You've got to do the thing first. And so that minimum viable action is exactly that, right? Doing the thing first. And of course, many of us, if we walk to the letterbox, we'll be like, oh, I didn't get dressed just to walk to the letterbox, and you're going to go further. So I think
you would be so surprised how, it sounds ridiculous because we're actually gaslighting ourselves, but you would be so surprised how often that does work. And the same can be said if you're feeling overwhelmed about, something you need to write for work. For example, you need to create a speech or a presentation or a report. If you just tell yourself, I'll do one line, that's the minimum viable action. Once your brain has got the memo that, no, we're doing this now, you can do one line and you've done one line, but more often than not, you'll do 5 lines. So it is just about what is the tiniest chunk of the thing that I can put in place. And, some people call that the 2-minute rule. If you want to start doing push-ups, do 1 push-up. It genuinely is, because then you become the sort of person that does push-ups because you've done them over a few days, and then it becomes settled, and therefore you don't need to think about that habit anymore.
And proof points. I talk a lot about proof points. You're creating proof points for yourself. Like you said, that you're the sort of person who does push-ups, or who does whatever habit it is that you're doing. So I think that's super helpful. Starting small, and you're always typically going to do more. But even if you don't, it's okay, because you've done what you said you were going to do anyway.
That's right. And that's a proof point.
Yeah, and it just stops you being down on yourself, like you said, I haven't done it again. Whereas, I did what I said I was going to do, and it starts to build that self-belief, self-efficacy, and I think that helps create momentum and motivation as well.
Exactly right.
You've shared so many great tips today, Bree. I love talking about all of this stuff with you. Are there any last insights on sort of habits or energy, or anything that you feel like you really wanted to share with the work and wellness listeners?
Let me think. Okay, so the last one is probably more so a reflection. This happened to me last week. Someone said, what's your podcast about, Bree? And I was sort of talking about the sort of work that I'm doing. And they said, so like self-help. And I bristled a little bit, because I don't know why I don't like that term. It's probably...
I don't like it either, Bree. I don't know why. I think it's got some negative connotations along the way.
I know. And maybe that's a problem for somebody else. We can reframe that. And I said, I don't really like that term, because it feels a bit gimmicky. And as you say, it's probably got, it's sort of something we make fun of maybe. And also I think, someone who's kind of trying to work in a science, evidence-informed way, self-help does sound a little bit, latest thing on the internet. So maybe I struggle with the lack of credibility there. That's a me problem. But anyway, I said, I don't really like that term. And then this person said, oh, so is it more self-optimization? And I thought, well, that's getting closer. But actually, it was just an acquaintance. And so, yes, I said, yeah, I suppose self-optimization is getting closer. But then as I was driving home after this conversation, I thought, no, the term I probably like in this work around habit formation is self-alignment, because what we want habits to be seen as allowing us to show up as the person who feels most like ourselves. So there's a reason that as much as I admire people who run marathons, don't want to run a marathon, because that doesn't feel like me. And so therefore, if I can just reflect on the sort of person that I want to be in the world and the values that I bring to that. So it might be things like, maybe a value of mine is consistency. Then if I have a value of consistency, it's much easier for me to create a habit where I record, a podcast episode every week for 30 weeks, because that is helping me feel more aligned to myself than running a marathon, because a marathon wouldn't be within my set of aligned values. So I just think this idea of habit formation, it can be something else to put on the to-do list, and it can be a rod to beat ourselves with. And that's the part I think that makes me uncomfortable. This self-optimization, we always have to be better. We always have to be hustling. For me, it's when I go to bed at night, if I've worked really hard on the 3 things that were important for me to have done that day, then there's a sense of self-efficacy, as you say, and it's a sense of pride, because I lived within my values for that day and I was aligned with myself in that day. So if I am someone who moves my body, then that's much easier to align with when I go to the gym in the morning, rather than I'm someone who runs marathons. If it's, if I go to work and I waste time all day, or I gossip about my colleagues, or I spend too much time on my phone, yes, I've gone to work that day, but when my head hits the pillow, there's a cognitive dissonance, there's an incongruence there, because I'm acting in a way that isn't in alignment with myself, with the Bree that I want to be in my value set. So For me, just to come full circle, all of this is to say that if you're interested in embedding new habits or stopping habits that aren't serving you, the first step and the most important step is to really think about this idea of self-alignment and what is it around your value set that makes you want to behave in a certain way. And then when you take those tiny steps, those minimal viable actions to behave in that way, and then you feel like yourself, that's the goal.
I think that is the most profound ending to a podcast that I've had, Bree. And why I love it so much is I talk quite a lot about self-awareness and the importance of self-awareness. And why I think it's important is because in a world where we are constantly distracted by social media and being shown what success should look like or what it looks like behind a screen, it is very easy to get carried away and think that's what I need to be doing. I need to be doing that. That person's doing that, and that's what success is. And I wonder how many of us are living lives that are true to ourselves or are true to what we think we should be doing. And I spoke a bit about this in the financial wellbeing podcast too, because people have these financial goals that they think they should have, but it's not actually aligned to their own rich life. What is a rich life? Not necessarily even financially rich, just what is their rich life?
Yes, yeah.
And I think you nail that from a habits perspective. Why am I doing this? And is it bringing me back to myself or is it taking me further away from myself? And I think because we move so quickly through life, a lot of us don't sit and think, what is that? What am I really connected to from a values perspective? And is pursuing this next habit going to be aligned with my values or is it taking me further away from them? And I think that's a wonderful starting point before you even go down. How do you form the habits or what, what are we going to focus on? Is this even the right habit for me?
Yeah, and if you really get quiet and tune in, you will know. You will know if it's the right habit for you because, as I say, you will feel if you've had an interaction with someone or you've gone through your day and something's happened and you don't feel good about it, it's because it is out of alignment with the sort of person that you are. And so this is where the research really does meet some introspection and to kind of look back over your week or look back over your day and realize, did I show up today in the way that felt most like me? And if not, that might be a tiny little bit of information for you to pay attention to, where a habit shift or just a tiny little tweak might support you for tomorrow.
And I think it plays into energy as well, doesn't it, Bree? If we're doing things that don't feel like ourselves or aren't true to ourselves, I feel certainly in myself, if I'm doing something and I'm like, oh, that wasn't really aligned. And actually, I feel like it depletes me a lot more because it's not in line with my values.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the thing, you can be really tired after doing really important work, but it is aligned work. So, it's a privilege to be that sort of tired. It's when you feel that sense of, oh, it's a bit yucky in my stomach. I'm just can't quite put my finger on what I don't like about what happened today or, the way I made that decision. It's because your energy and your time and your intention was used in a way that isn't congruent with the way that you would like to be.
Such good points for consideration and for us to self-reflect, Bree. Thank you so much for your time. Where can the Work and Wellness listeners find you and how can they engage with and work with you?
Well, thanks, Ange. It's been my pleasure. I would love to hear from anybody over at The Habit Nerd on Instagram. That's probably the best place to catch me. A lot of my resources are there. I share hopefully educational content and, things that will entertain you. But send me a DM and I would be delighted to catch up with any of the Work and Wellness listeners over there. So thank you, Ange.
Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Angela Davies. Your work matters. Your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.